Good evening and welcome to this special edition of the Journey Home program. We're here taping this interview in the crypt of the Basilica of Saint Anne de Beaupré in Quebec, Canada. This is a part of our special trip here to Quebec and Montreal to film the shrines and churches of the faith here in Canada. And I'm hoping that you're enjoying these programs and the special on these shrines in Canada. But our guest this evening is Gilles Grondin. And I have to say that one of the reasons that Gilles is here as a part of the Journey Home program is because when we had Father Eric Nicolai as a guest on the Journey Home program, I talked to Father Eric about my own ancestry here in Canada and that my original name was Grondin. And he mentioned that he knew a man by the name of Grondin, Gilles Grondin, who was very active in the church here in Canada, especially in the pro-life movement. And so this particular episode, we're not only going to talk only about his journey of faith, but about his work in pro-life here in Canada. So bonjour, Monsieur Grondin.
Bonjour, Monsieur Grondin.
I'm not sure I said that well,
yes.
But it is a great privilege to be with you here, not only in Quebec, but in this wonderful church in Saint Anne de Beaupré, which was a part of your own spiritual journey. Is that not right?
Yes, indeed. When I started my classical studies, we called that in Quebec, I did my classical studies right here in Saint Anne de Beaupré. And this was a little bit before the war, the Second World War. And I saw that church growing, so to speak. The steeples were not on. The weekly parish masses were taking place in the crypt, not upstairs.
So they were here in this crypt?
Yes.
But it wasn't quite as decorated
no,
at that
it was
point?
not decorated at all. Only the pillars were there.
I see.
And so I saw it growing little by little from year to year.
All right.
And when I left in 1944, I terminated part of my classical studies, which I finished in Montreal afterwards. The work had advanced quite a bit, but it was only after the war, a long time after the war, many, many years, that I came back to Saint Anne de Beaupré to see
the beauty of
it.
Now, your work was as a diplomat, right?
Well,
for Canada?
yes, I entered the Canadian Foreign Service in 1956, and before that I had been working as a UN official in Korea, in the office of the Prime Minister of Korea at the time, with a British UN official who was an economic advisor, an economist.
And you were also the president of the pro-life movement here?
Not at the time, no.
Not at the time, but...
it's after I retired from the Canadian Foreign Service that I was offered to come into the into the Quebec chapter, so to speak, of Campaign Life Coalition, of which Jim Hughes was the president and still is the president. And by the way, he's very close to the American pro-life movement, to all your leaders in the United States. And I was the president of Campagne Québec Vie and the founder of Campagne Québec Vie for 13 years, 14 years. And so I retired from the presidency, but I continue my work for Jim Hughes.
Now, being a member of and a leader in the pro-life movement would indicate a commitment to the faith and the church, but that wasn't always so, and maybe it's a good time to let's trace back a bit and talk about your spiritual background and upbringing here in Quebec, right? Were you brought up in this area?
I was brought up right in this town here of Saint Anne de Beaupré. This is really where where I received my Catholic formation, conviction, and dedication. And
in this church or a local parish?
I beg your pardon?
In this parish here?
In this parish right here. I was not born into this parish. I was born in the Beauce County, which I suppose, I think you've been there before, in the Beauce, south of Quebec City, between Quebec City and the American border.
Yeah.
I was born in a small village there, and at the age of 12, I sought to the path of my life, so to speak, and I really thought at the time, and so did my parents, and think that I was called upon to become a Redemptorist father.
Is that right? Okay, is that why you came to here? Is that?
And my mother's arranged for me to be received here in Le Collège Sainte-Anne, which is right behind us here in the script. And I did the first part of my classical studies here until what we call versification. Versification means in the class where you learn how to make verses.
Yes.
But and then the fathers and myself, the Redemptorist fathers and myself, they decided this was not my place, and so I left to continue my studies in Montreal. You
had mentioned to me earlier about life as a part of the Catholic community when you were very young.
Yes, in those days, you know, everybody went to church. The churches were full at every mass, absolutely full. In the place,
in all the little towns.
In all the little towns of Quebec, everybody was practicing. And
I noticed in this church there's a lot of confessionals. Were the confessional lines long?
Oh yes, many. There were not sufficient numbers of confessors sometimes.
Yes.
But now you can see the state of our Quebec churches. It's very sad. We have undergone a complete cultural transformation, so to speak.
We're going to talk about that later. I think it's a very important thing. You also mentioned to me another part of your childhood, which I found fascinating, was the kind of Catholicism that you were brought up in. There you'd be out in the field, and at some point in time you all would stop, right?
Yes, when we heard the church bells at my grandparents', I used to go there to help them with the work on the farm. When we heard the church bell at noon, we all stopped and recited the Angelus. Taking off our hat and everything. And
so this is the Catholic Church in the 30s, right?
In the 30s, yes. I was born in 1926, and I was 88.
When you came here to the church, so you were here in Saint Anne de Beaupré, you were considering the call to the priesthood and the Recollet Fathers?
Yes, Redemptorist.
Redemptorist Fathers. Redemptorist Fathers. I know the Recollects were involved with the early Quebec. The Redemptorist Fathers. So was your faith very strong at that point in your life?
Very, very strong indeed.
But they helped you discern that wasn't to be your vocation?
It was not for all sorts of reasons. I guess I was advised not to stay in the Redemptorist clientele, so to speak.
All right. How do you then get involved with the diplomatic service?
I got married to a French woman in 1948 whose family was in the diplomatic milieu.
Yeah.
And from there, I managed, with their help, to find a job with the United Nations Korean Reconstruction Agency, UNCRA. We used to come, it was known as UNCRA, United Nations Korean Reconstruction Agency. I was sent to Seoul city and was integrated into the office of the Prime Minister of Korea, where there was this British economist, economic advisor, and I continued part of my formation with him, so to speak,
as a diplomat,
as a UN official. And then I was brought to the idea that perhaps the best thing for me to do would be to enter the Foreign Service as such, the National Foreign Service as such, instead of the International Foreign Service. I applied to enter the Canadian Foreign Service, and after many examinations, I was admitted into it. And then, since I had already been to the United Nations, they sent me to a purely Canadian diplomatic mission in Mexico City. And so I drove all the way through the United Nations, through the United States.
It's a long way to Mexico City from here. I can tell you that.
To Mexico City, where I stayed for an hour and a year and a half, and my wife and I separated there, and I came back to Canada. And they sent me to, the Canadian Foreign Service sent me to Vietnam.
What period?
In 1959, I was sent to the Indochina Commissions. This was where the institutions that were left in place after the French departed Indochina, and Canada, together with India as chairman of the commission, and Poland as the member from the left, as the country representing the left in that commission, were there in Saigon. And so I was on that commission on two occasions, 2 years each occasion, 59, 60, and 62, 63. I went through all the countries of Indochina, and I could see at the time that something was in preparation for the real Indochina War, which involved the United States.
That's right.
And after my stay in Indochina, I was sent to New York because, again, of my United Nations experience in the Canadian mission to the United Nations in New York, where I stayed for 3 years and a half. And then I was detached, so to speak, to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, to the office of the High Commissioner for Refugees, and they sent me to Senegal in West Africa. I stayed there for 2 years and came back and was sent as the representative of the United Nations Development Program in Niger, north of Nigeria, which is a French-speaking part of West Africa. And then I came back to Canada and was sent as chargé d'affaires of Canada to Haiti.
Oh, you've been some very hot spots in the world, haven't you, at one point? Either before or usually before some of these wars.
Yes, Revert was always interesting.
Yes. Now let's talk about, there you are in a very influential positions, cross-cultural. I mean, I can't even imagine that. Here I cross culture from the United States to Quebec, and that's quite a jump, and you've gone to many different cultures. Yes. What was happening to your faith during these many years?
My faith was practically forgotten. I used to go to Mass every now and then, but not very convincingly. I was, so to speak, dedicated to doing a career in the diplomatic service. And quite frankly, that seems to have been my main preoccupation at the time. And I came to give up practicing completely, except on the main Christian feasts like Christmas, Easter. Every now and then I used to go to church and sit down in a pew, well hidden from sight, and reflect.
But I just said that because I think this is very important because, and I'm not just pointing a finger at Quebec, but we recognize that Quebec, like many places in the world, at one time very strong Catholic faith that has gone through a difficult time, and in some ways your life kind of spans that time. Yes. And so it might be interesting for yourself to reflect, there you had your childhood faith, your commitment, your baptism, your confirmation, the practice of the family, all of that, very disciplined, but then you lost it later. What happened?
It's hard to say, you know. It was a sociological evolution or slow transformation, cultural transformation. And, you know, people started leaving the church, living as they wished to live. What became important was what you thought, not what the church thought. In Quebec, we had been used, I guess, for centuries to be told by our clergy where the good was. They were very, very good at seeing to it that we knew where to go, how to go about it, and where to end. Yeah. We were followed very, very closely. And then came in Vatican II, and then there was this full crisis in the church. Crisis of faith, crisis of adaptation to our modern culture. You know, slowly society came to its very free ways, as we all know, if you know what I mean. And
I came, you know, my teen years were in the 60s, and, you know, I turned 20 in the 70s, and I was in the midst of that whole rebellion. So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I was older than you were at the time, but I was very affected by this.
And when you were particularly, you were able to focus your life on your work, your diplomatic service, and and the church, like many probably other issues in your life, just kind of dwindled along
Yes.
with your focus.
I still remained committed to trying to Christianize our society somehow through the work that I was doing. Re-Christianize society as part of what used to be my ideal. This ideal that was born right here at the Redemptor's Fathers in Saint-Anne-de-Beaupré. And this really never left me, trying to live the life of a Christian, engaged in that career. And this was, it coincided with the Cold War, fully. And so I was very alert to what was involved in that Cold War. Totalitarian regime as versus free society. And I was always very, very interested in these philosophical differences, and which I followed very, very, very closely. This kept the faith in many ways, because I used to pay a tremendous amount of attention to church documents. What the various popes thought about this crisis. Pius XII, and then the other popes that followed, John the 23rd and Paul VI. Paul VI especially, I was very, very influenced by him, so to speak, because I used to read every document that came out of his pen.
So even though you weren't actually attending church regularly, you were still connected to listening what the church had to say.
Spiritually, I guess, intellectually, I'm very connected to the fight of Western civilization, Christian Western civilization, against communism, against totalitarianism, and I was very much involved in this from a philosophical point of view. And I was tremendously impressed by the visit of Paul VI to the United Nations. I was there in New York at the time, in 2 or 3 years before his death. And that had a tremendous impact on my own life, on my. I thought what he said at the United Nations was very prophetic. Paul VI was a very profound pope.
He made this. I was wondering, his credo for the people, his creed of faith, that it's kind of sad. It was an excellent expression of the faith that's been completely forgotten. But it was a powerful expression of the faith. I wonder, was that one that had an influence on you at the time?
Yes, plus Humani Vitae, the encyclical Humani Vitae, and which really, which I've read, although I was not practicing my faith, and I've studied it. I thought it was very, very profound, and I kept studying that, and slowly, intellectually, I came back to the church.
I was going to say, before we go to that next step, I want to back up just one before we take a break. You were philosophically still connected to the church, which was feeding from your childhood. And I'm also wondering, though, what about your private prayer devotions? Was that still a part of your life during all those years?
Yes, I was doing my morning and evening prayers.
Okay.
I never missed that.
As a diplomat, you were still very active.
Diplomat.
So even with the beauty of that, you're saying, though, even though you weren't practicing the other aspects of your faith, yet that discipline of prayer kept feeding you during all those years.
Yes, indeed. As my mother used to say, do your morning prayer, evening prayers. Yeah, even when I was a grown-up, she always reminded me of that, and my brothers and sisters. And so that stayed with me, and although I was not going to Mass, but the morning and evening prayers I was reciting, yes.
That formed the foundation then for what later the Lord would build on. Why don't we take a break now, and we'll come back in just a minute with our continued conversation with Gilles Grondin. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back. Again, this is our special edition of the Journey Home program that we're taping here in the crypt of the Basilica of Saint Anne de Beaupré in Quebec, Canada. And our guest tonight is Gilles Grondin. And Gilles, thank you very much for condensing so much. I mean, all the places you've been. It's interesting you talk about at least keeping the daily prayers and some of the aspects of your childhood faith, even though you weren't regularly practicing the faith and going to Mass. But in the same context, here you are in Korea, in a completely different religious culture, in Japan, Mexico City, which of course at one time was very Catholic, but during the time you were there was a very difficult time. Yes. And then there in Africa. What was it then that opened your heart to reawaken your childhood faith?
I guess the suffering in my own private life. I was quite frankly anguished by many things in my private life, and I came out of it. I managed to come out of it thanks to my return to the church, thanks to my meditation, my prayers, my daily Mass even.
So that increased. When did you start going to daily Mass? When you were back in Canada?
I was back in Canada from Africa, and I was living close to that church, and I decided that I would go to Mass daily, and confession, and communion. And I did this very, very purposefully. And I retrieved, in that fashion, I retrieved the serenity of in my life. I retrieved spiritual serenity, how do you say, repose, quietness, peace, interior peace. And if today I continue to go to Mass every day, communion every day, confession quite often, and if I was not doing that, I would not find many reasons to continue to live, to tell you the truth.
Had you returned as the advice of someone, or was it the Spirit leading your heart from within?
The Spirit leading my heart. I was a very lonely man, if you wish to put it that way, and I found in religion, I found in Jesus a friend in whom I could confide, whom I trusted, whom I loved. And so this brought peace back into my life. And when I came out of the Foreign Service, I had met before leaving many Catholic leaders, and one of them thought that I would be the right man for the pro-life movement, and he persuaded me to start lobbying in Ottawa for pro-life. Yes, I was out of the Foreign Service at the time, but since I knew the Hill very much, as we call it, Parliamentary Hill, I knew many of those politicians through my work before. And so he says, why don't you try to convince them to give us a pro-life law through lobbying very systematically. And I did this for a good 2 years, and then they decided that Quebec, the Campaign Life Coalition, Coalition Nationale pour la Vie, should really establish itself in Quebec as well. Despite the language differences and everything, we should have our own movement in Quebec. In French, and steeped in our own culture in Quebec. And so they asked me if I could give thought to founding a chapter for Campaign Life Coalition, which I did, Campagne Québec Vie. And I was the president of Campagne Québec Vie for 13 years or so. So we founded that and managed to print a monthly newsletter, which became known for its direct language and focus on the issue. And
did you yourself become kind of the spokesperson or recognized in Quebec?
Yes, I think so.
At least as one of those in the front of the pro-life movement?
Yes, I became quite well known among the pro-lifers in Canada, in Quebec, and even in the United States. And I went to one of these marches for life in Washington at one point. And the main thing, I tried to reawaken the Quebecers to their former culture, pro-life culture, through pointing out to them that since they have received the pro-death, as I used to call it, culture, they are simply disappearing for a good reason, that as St. Paul says, that the salary of sin is death. And I tried throughout those 13 years to show that with the help of statistics. I think you already know that the French-speaking component of Canada is slowly disappearing through abortion, contraception, the contraceptive culture through abortion.
Gilles, I would like to quote something from a book about this shrine, written, I think, by someone you knew, yes. Right? This is from a book called The Royal House of Beaupré, St. Anne and Her Shrine by Georges Bélanger?
Georges Bélanger.
Yeah, who was Georges Bélanger?
He was a juveniste, that is a college comrade of mine, right here during the war.
So you knew him then. He wrote this wonderful book which tells the whole history of this, but it talks about the early days of the French here in Canada, and we're going back to 1661. You know, the Champlain came here in 1608, and so we have this colony, very small, yet he writes, the author writes about the commitment of the faith of the pioneers, and he writes, "Two statistics show the beauty of these first families. The Quebec government records only one illegitimate birth in New France up to 1661, and only one other up to the year 1690. So we're 30 years, 40, 50 years, one or two. I mean, that's just illegitimate births. We've come a long way. I mean, what are the statistics, let's say, of abortion in Canada, and particularly French Canada?
Yes. In Canada, every year practically, there are close to 110,000 abortions a year for the whole country. I think we're about 30 million. But Quebec is, despite the fact that at the moment Quebec's population is less than 1/4 of Canadian population, we commit more than 1/3 of all abortions. And
that's a particular shame because of the Catholic Foundation.
Exactly. And that is to say anywhere between 32 and 35,000 abortions a year. And then we turn around and receive about 35,000 immigrants every year to replace the killed babies. And so with such a regime, of course we are bound to disappear. And I spent my 13 years as president of Campagne Québec Vie pointing that out, you know, using that demographic argument or cultural argument, in addition to the religious arguments that came to mind, and this was quite true. I kept quoting the Bible, which says, "The salary, the wages of sin is death." I kept quoting this. And I know at this time I'm out of the movement now. And I don't say that this is due to my past interventions, certainly not. I would never give my work such importance, but I kept saying that, and at this time the Quebecers know they are disappearing. If nothing is done, they know they are on their way out of this country.
You see it just in the pure biological demographics. I mean, at one time there were large, deeply committed Catholic families. Well, if the Catholic families are dwindling in size, if on top of that abortion is dwindling them even more, and if they're being replaced by immigrants that aren't bringing the Catholic faith in, then it's just slowly the writing's on the wall.
It is right there on the wall.
Something else that you told me, I didn't even realize that as an American, I didn't realize that in fact Canada preceded America in its legislation for abortion.
1968, 69, and it was done by 3 Catholic French-Canadian politicians that went to Ottawa and, responding to public pressure created by the post-Vatican II cultural pressures.
the shifts.
Shifts. Well, they responded to that pressure by decriminalizing abortion, homosexuality, and divorce. All these three things were crimes. Before. And after that, and this was the signal for the whole Quebec population to march that way. And we're right there now. We're in the midst of that.
You know, it's one thing. The church does call us to act on our conscience. We are called to act on our conscience, but that requires a formed conscience. And as you're talking about the whole Quebecois, is that the right word? Yes. Going in the one direction, following these particular leaders, what we're ending up is with generations of unformed consciences.
That's it, exactly. Yet, I think there's an awakening, especially through the with the young. They are told what's happening. They can see for themselves. And for instance, I've had the great happiness of seeing in my own family the conversion of my grandson, who was not even baptized, as a result of a decision by their parents, including my daughter. And they were not even baptized, and at one point he came to me and says, Papi, I want to get baptized.
That's a great gift from the Lord for you too.
He was 23 years of age, and needless to say, I spent that evening crying.
You told me there was something wonderful about the day of his baptism.
Yes, the whole family was there. Cousins and faraway cousins, people I had never met, and they were all related to my family. They were at his baptism in the cathedral in Montreal. And since that time, he has become a lawyer. He was a student. He's a full lawyer, and he's now working for the federal government. And he's married, and his wife is expecting. So I will be a great grandfather in about 6 months' time. And so there is one thing. This, you see, he was 33 when he got baptized. Again, no, he 23. Was 23, and now he's 33, and the rest of the family will follow, I'm sure.
Well, the fact that there was something in their heart that was drawing them to be there on that day of baptism. Yes. They weren't, from a pagan perspective, rejecting all this. They saw that there was something important here.
There was an important message, and he gave it very sincerely, very loudly, and publicly. He had that courage.
You say you see hope here in Quebec. First of all, you think John Paul's outreach to the youth, particularly, has sparked some of that hope?
Indeed. He's married to a young woman who was also very impressed by John Paul II. And in fact, they met when John Paul II came to Toronto. They met there, right there at the youth rally. And you see the rallies of the Pope with the youth, they are working.
Yes.
And I think the Pope, hopefully, he will continue forever doing this. But because he's very charismatic with the young, he knows how to talk to them.
I know there's a movement in Quebec, the separatist movement, and I don't particularly want to talk about that issue, but is a part of that a desire to rediscover not only the history, but the spiritual heritage?
I think so. Personally, this is my personal opinion, I think Quebec should have a very special place inside Canada. And that place should be negotiated as part of Canada, but in a very special place in order to make it possible for the Quebecers to develop their culture freely, according to their Catholic traditions, which they would find out again after that. I think this would constitute a cultural and religious challenge to themselves, to their way of living. But all of this has to be done in agreement, and according to my own convictions, in agreement with the rest of Canada.
In this rediscovering of history is so important to faith. I know I've mentioned to you, I mean, that's how you and I got acquainted, as I discovered my own ancestry here in Canada. And one thing I discovered, see, I was brought up in America, I was brought up as a Protestant, I was brought up on, quote, Elizabethan history. My understanding of England, America, the French were always the enemies. You know, that's our view of that as I was brought up. And then when I converted to the Catholic Church and rediscovered history, I discovered the Jesuit missionaries to Canada. I had never heard of them, and discovered the wonderful faith here. So part of this, even our coming to Canada, is a part of my own desire. And all I'm saying is that reinvigorated my faith to see the faith that was here in this spot. And so our prayer is that the young of Canada would rediscover that too.
Yes. It brings me back to what our history professor was saying right here behind me. In those days, you see,
when you were in the school,
yes, at the school, he was speaking about the heroism of these first French missionaries, Catholic missionaries, the Jesuits, and the Récollets, and how they went along the river systems of North America, founding these missions. And then, of course, the French colonists followed. And it was a good, a very heroic history, which was cut short by British conquest. However, we continued. The French Catholics continued to spread along these rivers, and they became very sought after missionaries in other countries. For instance, when I was in Indochina, I was helped by the Redemptorist fathers who were there. The Canadian Quebec Redemptorist missionaries were there in Indochina. And so I kept with them. It helped me with my practice of religion. At the time, I had not yet given up on Catholicism at the time. And so
there's always a connection. I know that one of the things that I discovered in my family is that one of the last of the Jesuit missionaries, a part of that whole group, that was a Father Potier, who was in the mission of Detroit back in the early 1700s, mid-1700s, eventually came across the river to a little town called Sandwich and formed a church called the Assumption Parish. I'm not sure if that was Jesuit or Récollet. Récollet?
I wouldn't.
I wasn't sure, but my family was a member of that parish. And so there's our connection to our personal connection. But again, what I'm emphasizing, a couple things. Again, this rediscovery of the history. And we need to help our Quebecois cousins to discover that. But there's something else that's the message there. John Paul calls us to new evangelization. His new evangelization means the re-evangelization of the Catholic regions. And sadly, in the last 50 years, a lot of people have become very lackadaisical on their sharing of their faith. And sometimes they buy into the one side that says, well, if they're invincibly ignorant, if they don't know, God will have mercy. But to me, that's true. But we can't necessarily count on that. We can't play God. And what inspires me is that when the Jesuit missionaries came to the Indians, well, there was no one more invincibly ignorant than the Hurons,
Exactly.
you know, in Iroquois. And if they had said, well, we'll leave them to the mercy, they never would have come. Yeah. But they gave their life
exactly
to share the faith. We should too.
Absolutely. This is the way to do it. This is the way. There's a way of giving our life in the present culture, you see. It's working like you are in your own, with your TV station. And like I try to work as in the pro-life movement, and certainly this is a new way of being a missionary. You know, I always thought that this encyclical that Pius XI published, and I was still here when he did, and I read it. I remember he said that laity is called upon, and he said this prophetically, is called upon to help the clergy spread the Catholic faith. And he wrote, I cannot remember the title of the encyclical, but I've read it, and it's very true. I think you should go back to that.
Well, it's beautiful, because that's exactly then what John Paul reemphasized in Christa Fidelis Laeti, yes, that the laity are at the front line, yes, of the apostolate. Absolutely. And that's what we're called to do. Absolutely. Gilles, a couple things as we close, and thank you very much for this interview. First of all, would you have any words of hope to, let's say, parents who are watching whose children have drifted from the church like you yourself did? Any words of encouragement or hope to them?
Yes. Yes, I do, because it says in the gospel that if you pray me, you will receive. We pray, and I've been given that way, personally, and through my family as well. If you pray me, you will receive, because I love you. I am your Father, don't forget. God seems to say to us, you see. And we have to have absolute, full confidence. Absolute confidence. And this brings peace into ourselves. It brings peace to our mind, into our heart. And the others ask themselves, what is the source of that peace our grandfather has? What is the source of it? And this is how they come back.
And remembering that great cloud of witnesses that are around us, like here we are at this wonderful Basilica of St. Anne, you know, that all those French Canadians prayed for so long to ask for her intercession to our Lord Jesus. How has then returning in deep commitment to the faith, to the Catholic faith, strengthened your faith in Jesus Christ?
Oh, completely. I mean, I would not be able to live 5 minutes more if I did not have faith in Jesus and hope in Jesus, if I did not love Him. And I know for a fact, I know because I live this every day, that He is within me and is acting around me, through me. And this is His way of giving us hope again, peace again, faith again.
And the sacraments are an important part of your walk.
And the sacraments are the indispensable parts, because He has chosen, you know, let's not forget, He's a very profound psychologist. He has chosen to spread His church through the agency of His children, of man and woman. He knows that by doing this, He gets us to commit ourselves to Him and to His gospel. So this is how He saves us.
Gilles, thank you very much for joining us on the journey home. Thank you for your witness and for your work, your own sacrifice in the pro-life movement. And even as I know this program is being broadcast, many are walking to take a stand for the issues of pro-life. Many around both of our countries are seeking that many would return to their faith and take a bold stand like Isaac Jogues and Saint Jean de Brebeuf. They would take a deep stand for their faith, even if it meant great sacrifice and ridicule. And I thank you for your life of that witness.
Thank you very, very much, Marcus. And my meeting you is history for me.
Oh, well, it's a great pleasure.
It's a historical moment for me.
Well, thank you very much. I want to thank you all for joining us on the journey home. I hope you enjoyed this special segment. Hope you tune in for the other segments of the journey home. Those that are live from EWTN, but also those that are taped here special in Canada to help us understand the wealth of the faith here in Quebec. Thank you for joining us in the journey home. God bless you. I'll see you again next week.